I was talking to a prospective client today, and she had been researching accessibility and compliance, and she had talked to at least one other service provider before our meeting. And she brought up independently something to the effect that she knew accessibility didn't stop. And it immediately made me think that she had heard the part of the sales pitch where the seller tells you that accessibility is a journey, and this is while they're conveniently selling an annual subscription for accessibility services and products and perhaps a whole suite of offerings. Well, yes, obviously accessibility continues on. We need to make sure that our digital assets are accessible, etc. But the service provider doesn't always need to be a part of that so-called journey. On the screen with me is a graphic where it's really a cycle graphic where there are arrows and they are pointing to different circles, and we have this cycle that's going on. And I've labeled it the accessibility services life cycle. And this is to give everyone an idea of where a service provider fits in and whether or not you need to continue with the service provider after the initial services have been delivered. So let's go ahead and we'll start at the very center of the graphic, and there's a circle for audit. So that's the service where everything's going to start. Here we're going to find issues, and then we continue on to remediation. And then with remediation, we are fixing issues. And then we get to another circle, re-audit. So when we're re-auditing, we're making sure that the fixes have been made correctly. And then we move on to WCAG conformance, which is the result of a series of remediation and re-audits. So once we've worked through all of the issues and everything's been resolved, then your digital asset, let's say it's a website, will be WCAG conformant optimally. So once you've reached that place, then you have reached your end objective, right? Because this is what sellers don't they omit from the conversation is that there is an endpoint. The endpoint, we take a digital asset and we get to a point where we're WCAG conformant, and you have done an excellent job at that point. And from there, it's just about maintaining that conformance and not introducing new accessibility issues. So in this life cycle graphic on the right side, I have in the center service provider. So if you want to continue on with the service provider after WCAG conformance, you could have an annual audit, or let's say an audit after significant changes have been made. So let's say there's a redesign or you change platforms. Yes, an audit would be called for. And in that case, we have the arrow pointing back up to audit. But after WCAG conformance, the idea here is that you're only sourcing out the initial work that is needed because you just don't have the infrastructure, knowledge, and expertise to take on accessibility in-house. So you're looking for that third-party specialist to help you, and so you're going to shore up your accessibility, elevate yourself to this higher point where you are WCAG conformant, and then you continue on. So then we have the left side of the graphic where I have a training arrow pointing from WCAG conformance. And so once you've reached this place of accessibility, once you've reached this excellent threshold of accessibility, then you continue on. And the way you continue on is that you are training your contractors, your internal staff on accessibility. And obviously, this can be happening all the while, right? When you're starting the audit, your team can be learning the web content accessibility guidelines, etc. But here, just for the purposes of this graphic, we start training. And then with that training, it helps us maintain accessibility. And then, so once we have the training in place, we have the maintenance in place, along with that is going to be implementation of accessibility in our processes so that we are not making code edits where we are creating new accessibility issues, or we are not creating new content or making changes on the website where new accessibility issues are introduced. Now, all the while, your team is developing proficiency in accessibility. Accessibility is a subset of knowledge, but it's not like you can't acquire this. This isn't something that is so complex that you can't learn accessibility. It just takes some time, but it's not something where it's going to take multiple years if the person that is doing the work has the requisite background. So let's take a web developer, right? A web developer won't be familiar with accessibility just because they have a web development background, but they can learn it. And the best way to learn is through experience. And training is going to help bring in the fundamentals that are necessary to learn as your different roles on your team are experiencing accessibility, and they're gaining practical experience by going through these processes. So training is important. Implementation in the processes is important because we want to make sure we're not introducing accessibility issues. Over time, as this is happening, your team is going to develop proficiency. And then as we continue on, the next year I have is experience. And this is pointing back. We've come full circle back to the audit circle. And what's happening is now your team is starting to develop expertise because you have gone through all of this training, all of this practical experience. Remember, your team has already worked through the audit and worked through those issues found in the audit. Going through the audit is a very educational act. You're gaining practical experience and you're learning as you go. So it's a really good education in accessibility to just go through an audit. Obviously, it's not complete, but it's very good experience. And what this graphic is getting at is over time, your team will develop the experience to where they can be the ones conducting the audit. And you don't have to source out this work every time there's an accessibility question or there's just an audit that's needed or there are other services. Obviously, at your option, you can so choose to source out work to a third-party provider. But the point with this life cycle is it's not necessary. It's only necessary if it makes sense, right, to you as an organization, if it makes sense, if it's providing value. But some organizations, especially the budget conscious ones, they don't need to continually source out to third-party providers. And that's really the point here. When you hear accessibility as a journey, yes, to some degree, right? We need to make sure that we're not creating new content. So let's say we've worked on our website, but then we have documents that we're not paying attention to, right? So obviously we need to systematically go through our assets and improve the accessibility, ideally to where they meet the standards that we have set out as our objectives in our accessibility policy. But it's not never ending. And that's really the important part here, is because a lot of digital accessibility companies paint this picture that you need them forever. You have to have them on a subscription, which you absolutely do not, because you can pick up accessibility, expertise, knowledge in-house, and you can start taking on more of this. And just know that it's not a huge additional burden every time. This is an iterative process, and you improve as you go. So as your team gains more experience, then it will be easier to account for accessibility. It will become a part of your process, and your team will learn the most efficient ways to make it a part of your process, so that it isn't a tremendous burden, resource intensive burden every time you take on an accessibility project. So at first, you're going to source out to expertise, and later on, you may continue to do so if it makes sense for your organization. But you don't always have to be reliant upon that third-party provider. You can start to develop accessibility expertise in-house if you have a good program, if you are training, if you are implementing accessibility into your processes. It won't be a major undertaking. Rather, it will be something that is fairly seamless, where accessibility considerations are added as you are creating content and as you are editing code, as you are making design changes. And what you're going to do is you're going to systematically work through your digital assets so that you are taking care of accessibility, one or maybe a few digital assets at a time. But this is very important to know because a lot of people don't know this, and a lot of digital accessibility companies don't tell you that you won't need them eventually, or you have the option to continue on by yourself, because that really is the ideal, is where your team picks up the training and you absorb this information and this knowledge, and then over time your team develops the expertise to where you don't need a major accessibility project every time, because if your team is learning this and implementing it into their processes, your team can then conduct their own internal audits if they so choose, right? So the point here is that you can become the accessibility expert over time. And obviously, this is a simplified graphic, but it demonstrates my point that a service provider is needed initially because you have to source out. But then eventually, this is something that you can bring on internally if you so choose. But a lot of digital accessibility companies do not paint it that way because they want you to continue on with a subscription, and it's just not necessary. And the way that this becomes easier and easier is that your team does develop the expertise, and that's really what I think is the best option. I think it's the best route if your team starts to learn as you go and you become self-sufficient. And then where needed, so let's say you want an updated accessibility conformance report. A lot of people refer to that as a VPAT. Then yeah, it would be good to get that from a third-party provider. It's not like, and even if you are procuring these services from outside sellers, one advantage here is that there won't be as much work to do and the project won't take as long, because again, your team will already have the experience. And then if your team has the experience and the expertise, it's also going to help you with procurement. It's going to help you in so many different ways. And obviously, one of the biggest ways is that internally, you won't have to, if you have questions, you can go to those questions. You can go in-house to have those questions answered. So this is, I think, this is information that is missing in the marketplace, but it is really, really important. You'll hear accessibility is a journey. Yes, somewhat, but it's a journey where we don't need a seller necessarily, right? We don't need to source out to the company that's telling us this. We just need to continue on and improving with accessibility in-house and developing proficiency and gaining expertise through experience. So this is what I wanted to bring forward. If you do need help with accessibility, I will link to accessible.org in the description. Yeah, but I think I've covered the graphic. I have accessible.org on this graphic, and this is the accessibility services lifecycle. I will include also training for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. I will include a link to the WCAG course. This is my course on accessibility. I will include a link to that in the description. And if I can think of any more resources, I will add those as well.